What is the meaning of technology in our lives? What place does technology have in the universe? What place does it have in the human condition? And what place should it play in my own personal life? Welcome to the Seventh Kingdom. With your hosts, Jason Lang from Hollywood, California, and Stan James from San Francisco, California.
So in 1903, this woman, Lizzie Magie, invented a game that she wanted to show people that rents were making the rich people richer and was making the poor people poorer. And you know this game because it eventually went on to be called Monopoly. So when she made this game, and through a lot of like weird shenanigans, it ended up with Milton Bradley and Parker Brothers. And to make this game, there were factories had to be built to make this game. And there were workers who were making the little houses and making the little pieces. It's like, what is a top hat? And I forget all that stuff. So by creating this game, this woman, Lizzie Magie, created all these jobs and created this game that everyone, has to buy now so you can play it at Christmas time. And we're thinking about how things are so different today. And so, Jason, tell them what we were thinking about the modern parallel.
Yeah, Monopoly is, I think, a great example. I was talking to a friend, a couple months ago, and I tried to kind of demonstrate, I think, one of the shifts that's happening right now in our culture. And I think games are a cool, easy one to see because, like you said, I'm a toy tycoon. 75 years ago, let's say, I invent some cool toy or game like Monopoly, and it's a hit, and people love it, and every little kid wants it and wants to play with it. Well, back in the day, because it was actually like a physical thing people had to own, if I wanted to sell more, I literally had to make more. So I had to get more raw materials, hire more people to take those raw materials and make it into the game or the toy, whatever it is, and then hire more people to ship those out to the various stores and that were actually selling those raw materials to people. So this whole infrastructure of kind of jobs comes up around it. And even if the game just becomes more and more and more and more popular, even if I never change the game, every time someone new wants to buy one, I have to make a new one from scratch, like physically actually have to make one, which is really different to kind of what we're seeing happen right now in what the shift we're kind of calling, I guess, the move to the information economy, some people would call it. But on the other side today, so the example I like to use is Angry Birds, which has become an institution. I mean, it's a franchise. There's a movie come in. There's T-shirts at Target. My 3-year-old nephew has played it for like the first 2 years of his life. Like, it's huge. But the crazy thing about Angry Birds and being, I guess, what you would call kind of a virtual game is it in itself, I don't know, let's say Rovio, the guys that made it, for all I know, it was 2 guys who had this idea and made the game, hired an artist, cranked it out in, let's say, 100 hours to be kind of conservative.
I'm sure a pair of talented programmers and an artist could make something of the complexity of Angry Birds in a week. No doubt that's possible.
But then what happens when that becomes a wild success? That 100 hours worth of work scales to infinity in terms of reproduction. So if 1 million people want to buy it next week after bought it last week, they don't need to spend another 100 hours making more Angry Birds. They just keep reproducing that one.
Well, and the thing is, they're not reproducing it. They're just paying their server bill jumps from like $100 to $200. And
exactly. But I guess the thing that fascinated me was that initial 100 hours of work could theoretically be all they actually ever do with that property. Now, as Angry Birds, they are good capitalists, so they've kept expanding and adding more levels and adding different versions of the games. But I think that just that the simplicity of that idea that in a kind of a digital economy, my one initial creation can be replicated to infinity without more work from my part. And I think that is causing and is about to cause a huge shift in kind of our working culture, in our economies, and what it means to have a job even.
And the economic term I've recently learned is the marginal cost. My MBA friends have filled me in that the marginal cost of an item is how much does it cost to make another one. And the marginal cost of a custom furniture is really high because your carpenter has to go make another table or something. But the marginal cost of like an MP3 is zero, or as close to zero as you can get, because you just hit copy on your computer and now there's two MP3s. And as more and more things are this type of good, well, the question we're going to talk about today is this destroying jobs, or what happens to work in this case? So this Lizzie Magie invented Monopoly. So in a sense, her type of job is safe. But what of all the people who were making those little wooden hotels and the little houses, and the people who were packing the Monopoly boxes, and the people who were sailing the ships that were delivering the packages of Monopoly boards? Their jobs in the Angry Birds scenario is gone.
Completely. And in a way, it's a type of outsourcing we're seeing, with the idea of outsourcing being jobs that were once here are now somewhere else, I guess you could say.
I guess first they go out to another country, and then they go out completely, I think is the pattern that we're seeing.
Yeah, the idea that there's cheaper labor somewhere else, so we send our work over there. And it's been very clear and very, I think, on people's minds, especially in terms of manufacturing in the last couple of decades. This idea of made in America and how it kind of disappeared in all of our electronics and a lot of our cars and a lot of our clothes. And a great majority of many things we consume are manufactured in other countries. So that's work that was once here that's not here.
But the thing I was just reading was how manufacturing in China over the last 7 years has gone down 15% in China, and the competition for the Chinese factory worker is not that the jobs are going to go back to America or go to some even poorer country. It's that their job is either going to be done by a robot in the case of making a shoe or something, or it's a job which is gone forever, like creating, putting DVDs into packaging, because there are no more DVDs to be shipped around, or there won't be in 5 years. Netflix is who they're scared of, is who's getting rid of their job.
The Netflix is even an interesting one in that it turns out it wasn't Netflix even that really killed Blockbuster. It was Redbox, right? It was the little machine that was actually a robot that just gives you the movie. And that little machine has a small footprint, so it just integrates into places people are already going. There's no need for a separate video store.
Right.
To the extent that these huge Blockbuster buildings were. There's just 90% of what people rented at Blockbuster were new releases, that came out within the last 6 to 12 months. So Redbox particularly, I think, cannibalized that sale. And then they put them in grocery stores, so you didn't have to go somewhere else. You were already at the grocery store. Oh, and I'll pick up a movie. Which is just another example of, I think, the elimination of certain types of jobs that, it's been going on for really as long as technology has been around to an extent.
Yeah. Now, another thing which has come up lately, Jason and I were just talking to a friend of ours who recently hired a programmer in Pakistan to do some WordPress development. And by all accounts, this programmer is doing an awesome job. And so the thing that hit me was, I'm a programmer tech guy. So my job is, in a sense, in danger these days. So it's not just the factory workers in Detroit who are worried about their jobs being outsourced, but even the classic information worker, our jobs are just as easily outsourced. Yeah, first to Pakistan, or in some point maybe it just becomes so automated that there's an AI that can do what we do.
A huge concern is to me as well that I'm seeing that as I do a lot of WordPress development as well, and it's interesting in that what I do in WordPress almost feels like a temporary blip in the system where I'm not like you, so I'm not like a fully trained coder that knows languages and how to do everything from scratch. I've kind of self-taught myself enough PHP in the context of WordPress to take other people's code and then customize it. So this idea of kind of hacking a template, so to speak. And even for me, I'm seeing like the templates are getting really good. And pretty soon, there is this whole startup space of like Squarespace, and I think Wix, I think, is another one. These kind of self-hosted websites that are just point and click, and you hit a button and you can choose your designs, and it's like, it's all good. And there we're seeing again, it's like, I don't know how big the team of Squarespace is, but they're handling a structural need now. Maybe there's 30 of them. And they're specializing in that code design, then translates into tons of websites for far more people than ever before. So it's like Squarespace could take over the world, and then web designers would be out of a job, right?
It's kind of like your Redbox example of Squarespace makes websites. They're not totally customizable, but they do the job for 90% of companies who would need a website. And turns out 90% is a pretty big number of all businesses.
Yeah, and then for that other 10%, it's like, oh, why not send it overseas to someone that can work for a drastically reduced rate compared to what I would, but in a sense is actually, you're paying them pretty well for their culture and their geography and where they're living, so you're actually helping them out and the economic development of their region, because then they're making a little bit more than the average amount in that area, and theoretically can maybe go spend it, which kind of bolsters that economy. So it is an interesting form of economic redistribution.
Yeah. So we're talking, so far we've kind of, I guess we've sound almost alarmist, like the jobs are going away, the jobs are going away. But then there's the flip side, right, that we are all enjoying that things are cheaper. Like the tennis shoes, which are made in China, are cheaper than if we had to pay U.S. prices. I like WordPress is a free program I can download and use. I don't have to spend a week programming or hiring a programmer. So it's just technology is like making our life better in that things are cheaper and more freely available. But
yes.
Is it stabbing us in the back by taking away our jobs?
To an extent, I think it is. And it's going to happen in a lot of regions where, there's the economy of the world has been driven by this kind of industrial drive for the last 200 years. It really is focused around the production of things. And even that, I feel like, is, we're seeing it particularly in tech sectors, I feel like, almost plateauing. Like, I'm really fascinated by this concept of the good enough. Like the MP3 it's not a great delivery mechanism. It destroys a tremendous amount of audio information, but it was basically good enough. It was just like, it solved that problem. It took over. 99% of people are happy listening to their music like that. And I think we're going to be seeing that in a lot of other regions. Like even, I have the newest iPhone and it is smoking fast. And I actually there's not enough for me to do on here at this point that makes me need it to be faster. I'm using a desktop and I edit HD video. I'm using a desktop from 2008 and it's pretty good for me right now.
On the physical space, I would even say there's a parallel with things like IKEA, that it's not great furniture, but it's pretty damn good. It's good enough, and it's so much cheaper than the alternative that this sort of mass-produced, standardized, I don't know, probably built by robots, it's good enough. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we saw, to an extent, some of this has been, I guess, attempted to be offset by the like purposeful design of certain things that wear out over time.
To create jobs.
Yeah, the idea that we could have built a car like 50 years ago that was easy to replace and easy to fix, and would run for a very, very long time. And to an extent, we did with the VW Bugs that people still get for that reason. Yeah, because everything you needed to know to fix it was in that manual, and you didn't need fancy tools, and so they started designing, I think, things to kind of degrade a little faster, so then you'd have to buy it again sooner. But that only works when you want to be buying stuff to begin with, which I think is kind of we're seeing a shift away from. So it's really interesting to me and I think, I feel like I can speak for you as well, as being people that are kind of in some ways in the intersection of tech and art and creativity. It's like, I have no idea where things are going. Like I don't even know. And it's really fascinating to think about, like, what is 90% of the world going to be doing for work, 15 years from now?
Because, again, we have this sort of paradox that technology is making it easier than ever to survive, by which, raw survival, starvation is not an issue, it's obesity. So it's not that we're all going to, like, starve because we can't afford, well, I can say maybe we don't have the money, but we will be able to survive. But work seems like such an integral part of human life. And what do we do when there's nothing left to do? Or will we somehow invent new things to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we're seeing, particularly in our culture, which, we're at kind of the center of the West, Americana, I guess in some ways, most affluent society in the world in terms of people having access to lots of things and a fairly high quality of life. Now, there's certainly poverty here and whatnot, but overall, things are pretty good here. And I think what we're seeing is, and globally to an extent, obviously much slower in some places than others, but it's like kind of an overall lifting on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like some basic food, shelter, and like survival instincts are just being solved, partly by technology, partly by cultural evolution and kind of this creation of a society and a safety net. So it's like, and more of the jobs that were literally oftentimes just you doing some action over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Those are the things that are disappearing, which isn't necessarily bad because there's a lot of really shit work out there.
An interesting little factoid with Christmas coming up. The story of Charles Dickens and his employee. Who was his employee that had the Scrooge's
Bob
employee?
Cratchit? I don't know. Cratchit maybe? Yeah.
Yeah, he was a copier, which basically they would have rooms full of people just copying important business documents because there was no Xerox. And so this was like a total profession to be a copier. And it's like, thank God that is not a profession today. I would not want to be a copier.
It's true. So on the one hand, it's like, yes, a lot of jobs are disappearing and honestly going to be completely eliminated by this emergence of robotics and the move kind of into digital space. But at the same time, they were kind of shit work that individually, I don't think I would ever wish upon a single person. Like, yes, I want you stuck in this place for the next 40 years of your life doing this one thing over and over and over.
But Jason, let me play devil's advocate here. I'm thinking of how Freud, in some point, said, like, the fundamental needs of a person, like at the very bottom, is work and love. Like those are the two things that people need most to be happy. And so maybe it was a shit job, but if you felt like you were needed, you know, that like it's important that I copy these documents and this is my work and this is my thing, that led to some kind of fulfillment. That if I don't know, if the computers and the robots take away all the work, maybe it's taking away some critical part of what we need to be happy.
I think there's definitely an argument to be made there. In my mind, it's not that it removes the ability to feel that importance. It kind of means everybody is an entrepreneur. Like you are literally either creating and creative or almost not part of this new economy. Like if you're not creating intellectual property of some sort, like I just don't really see what your future is to some degree, which is it's humbling and scary, honestly.
Yeah, and also humbling because your creative output is going to be judged on this global stage. You know, if someone 100 years ago who was also inventing a board game, you could have played that board game with your friends and maybe had a minor success in your town, but you weren't competing with. I mean, Angry Birds is what? Aren't they out of Norway or something? Like you don't even know where these things come from.
They are. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so at the same time, it's like forcing more people to be creative, but like I feel like the creative bar is also being raised because you are. I mean, in the same way that a programmer here is now competing against a programmer overseas. I mean, even in the arts, like that's a legitimate thing happening where, from my perspective in the film industry, I'm seeing there was a film recently that came out maybe a year or two ago, and they didn't have the money to pay union orchestra performers to do the score. But Skype was so low latency and good, they had the composer here conduct the Prague Philharmonic remotely in real time, and were able to record a score with these actual performers at non-union scale across the planet. And like, that's pretty mind-boggling to me. And I think we're going to be seeing that more and more with all kinds of arts to a degree. And then not only that, there's a whole nother topic even where it's just like, as an artist now, as we shift more towards kind of creative and cultural output, it's crazy to think about, I'm not just competing with other artists right now. Like with the nature of digital technology, I'm competing against the entire history of whatever my art form is in any given moment. It's like, I want to go record an album. Yeah, great. I'm not just, fighting against the dudes down the street. I have to go against the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. Like every time someone picks up an iPod.
Nassim Taleb in his book, The Black Swan, and I think also in Fooled by Randomness, he talks about this, how in different jobs are scalable to different degrees. And yeah, music is a perfect example of if you're a musician, you're competing with every other musician, but also every dead musician who ever recorded, which was not the case, 400 or 500 years ago. If you were a musician, you were the only source of music for people to hear. And so every town and village could support at least one musician, like the minstrel. And now that's gone.
And they were often even the only form of entertainment to some degree, in some places that people were competing for.
And now, Justin Bieber can throw one concert, and the whole world is entertained.
Exactly. Again, that digital scale thing, kind of not just upping things, but just destroying the whole ladder to begin with is pretty fascinating, because it has been interesting to me. There was the talk of the great democratization of media,
right?
And YouTube, and there are genuine YouTube stars and whatnot, but then it's these same tools that amateurs use, the stars get to use as well, and it turns out they use them really well. So something like Funny or Die comes up, where it's kind of a YouTube type site, but it's full of known quantities and performers, and it gets a lot of views, a lot of views. But one thing I did want to also kind of go into is the interesting thing about what's happening is it's destroying, I guess, a lot of jobs and work and I guess careers even, but it's also at the same time almost making certain types of work even more valuable, because there are certain things that don't scale and never will, and that...
Yeah, what are those?
I mean, there is this kind of like the whole idea of like, what are things that only happen in one place and time? Like, kind of to an extent, like the live performance, exactly. I do feel like to an extent is making a comeback. So we're seeing, I feel like the reemergence of like the importance of an artist actually being out on the road and like literally connecting with every single fan in every single town for that live experience that you just can't have somewhere else.
And there's also a rise of sort of crafts seem to be coming back in the form of, websites like Etsy and things where the worth of something, it means more now to have something which was actually handcrafted. If it's not mass-produced, is somehow even more special or showing that you're wealthy enough to afford it. But there is now a market for people who are really good at their craft to sell these things.
And it's, I think, another example of technology starting to handle kind of more of the mundane infrastructure, which in some ways makes it easier for people to just focus on the creative aspects. So, I don't know, 10 years ago, if I wanted to sell crafts, there's the whole business thing of how do I sell it and connect with customers and get the word out, and how do I literally get the money from the person to me if it's not an in-person transaction. But Etsy's kind of handling the infrastructure of that kind of online. Like, I think we're really seeing a solidification of, I guess, virtual infrastructure in the same way that, we had roads and transportation networks emerge and kind of solve that problem in the physical world.
So I had a friend here in San Francisco who, for Halloween, made a very, very cool space helmet. Was her costume was to be like, it was some David Bowie inspired thing, and it was like backlit and had a visor and stuff. And it was very cool. And I just saw last week that she put it up on Etsy. Does anyone want this space helmet? And she's selling them for like $180. Each one is handmade. She got picked up by Spiegel, the biggest magazine in Germany. And
wow!
I don't know how many orders she's getting, but I think it's really awesome that something she made just for fun and to impress friends at her Halloween party now is probably paying her rent here in San Francisco.
That's a fantastic, I think, example of, I think, to be competitive, and I don't know what the job will be, but it's like you're just going to have to be creating. I feel like creativity, the value of it is going through the roof right now, like to an extent never before.
Yeah, which is, well, they say that it was, when humans invented farming and stuff and sort of took the pressure off people from mere survival, that's what enabled the first artisans to start, instead of just making a pot to hold water, we can think about what some pretty designs we can put on the pot. So maybe now we can get into this whole new age of creativity at a scale and that we've never really seen before.
I think we're definitely headed there, and it's going to be interesting to see how kind of our economy and society, it's a big leap for, I feel like, a large part of our population to make. I'm feeling the struggle in my own life right now of, wow, like a lot of these jobs I thought might be there, they're very different now than what I imagined them would be. And I see them changing even more in the future, like particularly in Hollywood.
And similarly on the Silicon Valley side, I honestly can say I used to feel safe, that, I wasn't like those schmucks who went into, I don't know, drafting or something, these careers that were dead ending. Computers were the future, and computers are the future, but it turns out that anyone in the world can do computers, and even programming is not safe. So I guess I'll have to get creative.
And definitely, we'd love to hear your thoughts via email, Twitter, Facebook, or voicemail. What do you think about this whole shifting economy, and what are the jobs going to be in 20 years from now?
Please tell us.
Yeah, we want to know.